Hello, everyone, and welcome to MOS Live. You are joining us just in time for our coolest science story all about computer vision. Can computers learn to see? And we'll be taking your questions at the end. So if you're joining us on Zoom, please feel free to send those in anytime using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can also turn on subtitles by going to the closed caption button and selecting Show Subtitle. So if you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, I'm afraid we can't see your questions at this time, but we're so glad that you're watching with us. Welcome. And now to get started, my name is Meg. My pronouns are she and hers, and I am joined today by another wonderful educator. So I'm going to invite her to join us now and introduce herself.
Hi there, I'm Megan, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm very excited to hang out with you today and talk about how computers see.
Thanks, Megan. So just to start off, I'd like to play a quick little game, if you don't mind. Are you up for that, Megan?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to change the image behind me, and I'm going to just ask if you could tell me what it is that you see.
Okay.
So what is this?
That looks like a cute little dog. I think maybe a Chihuahua.
Yeah, good job. What about this one?
Oh, that looks like a blueberry muffin.
Yep. Here's another.
I think that's another dog.
All right, one more. What is this one?
So this one actually kind of resembles a dog, but I'm going to go with blueberry muffin.
Yeah, good job. Nothing fools you. And actually, that's just an example of how we humans are really, really good at telling the difference between objects, even when they look a little bit similar. So, like these dogs and muffins have sort of the same color, and maybe the blueberries sort of remind us of of eyes and a nose. But we're not easily fooled to think that a dog is a muffin or one of these muffins is actually a dog. And we can play this game with lots of different examples. For example, owls and apples, or perhaps parrots and guacamole. But given just a short amount of time, it's easy for us humans to recognize which of these images is a parrot and which is actually a bit of guacamole. You might be surprised to learn, though, that until very recently, computers have had a hard time telling these kinds of images apart. And to give you an example using this image, where here we have a person is holding a plastic bag with a muffin in it, and the muffin looks a lot like her dog, who is also standing right there. So I uploaded this image to CaptionBot, which is this fun little automatic image captioning program, and you could run this experiment at home if you like. And I wanted to find out what the computer thinks this image is, and it came back and said, I think it's a hand holding a dog. So it's getting there.
So yeah, I think I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty here. So I hope I'm not jumping in over Meg. It looks like I'm not. Okay, good. So sorry about that. So it looks like I'm back up. Now let's see what happens when we actually look at this picture of a little dog. All right. Now, first of all, special cells at the back of your eye that make up the retina, they absorb all of the light coming from different parts of the image. And right away, that light starts to be processed by each little patch of cells. And for each part of the image, the cells report whether there are light or dark areas, colors, or is anything changing over time. And that information is then sent along the optic nerve to a gateway region in the middle of the brain that decides, based on all the inputs your brain is getting, what to send to the main visual processing region all the way at the back of your brain, called the primary visual cortex. Now, once it arrives at the primary visual cortex, different clusters of specialized cells process the information in steps, adding new information and then passing it along. So, first, one region of cells looks to see if any of the light or dark spots actually make up edges of different orientations. Then another region looks at those edges to see where they meet to maybe make angles. Yet another region of cells takes those angles and sees how they fit together into shapes. As the image goes through these steps, the brain builds up a more and more detailed idea of what it might be looking at. And finally, regions in the temporal lobe down here start to sort out what category of thing it is, eventually arriving at dog. And this entire processing pathway is called the visual ventral stream, and it only takes a tiny fraction of a second. It's the reason why we're so good at telling the difference between, for example, dogs and blueberry muffins. So now we know a little about how we recognize objects, but what does this have to do with how we get computers to recognize images? Because remember, they're not that good at it.
Yeah, that's right. So actually, just in the last 10 years or so, computers have gotten a lot better than they used to be. And that's largely because of neural networks. So neural networks are a special kind of computer program. It's a kind of artificial intelligence or AI that is really good at learning by example to recognize patterns and solve problems. And as you might have guessed from the name, the idea behind neural networks is to try to use some of the same principles behind human object recognition to get a computer to do the same thing. So let's see what a neural network would do. Whoops. um, so let's see what a neural network could do with this same image of a dog. And we would ask it to break up the image into lots of different little pixel patches. And imagine that it's doing this for all of the pixels in the image, but we're just going to look at a few right here. And for each of those pixel patches, we're going to ask our computer to check whether there are any edges that it can find in there, the most simple pattern possible. So just something that's lighter on one side and darker on the other side. And when it thinks it sees a certain kind of edge, that pathway is going to light up. So let's do that for all of the different pixel patches here. And you'll see the different pathways lighting up each time it finds one of those edges. And once we've gathered all of that information about where all those edges are in different parts of the image, we can pass that to the next round and see if any of those edges can be taken in combination and add up to shapes. So is there anywhere in the picture where we have a top, bottom, and the two sides to make a circle? And once we've done that, we can take it even another step further and ask, well, do any of those shapes put together make up some specific feature like an eye or a nose? And find out where in the image we think an eye might be. And then finally, we can take all that information that we learned and say, well, from everything that I've learned, from edges to shapes to features, do I think that this is a picture of a dog or do I think it's not a picture of a dog? And as you can see, over all of this process, we've built a really scary looking diagram with all of these nodes and lines. But once you understand that all that's going on is this progression of information gathering as you build up from simple features to more and more complex features, then it gets a lot less scary. And you might have heard the term deep learning or references to like a deep neural network. And this is exactly what that means. It's referring to all of those intermediate layers that are breaking down the problem and gathering information at each step and building up from the simplest layer up to the most complex. So here's the thing, the first time that you turn on the neural network and ask it to identify the dog, it's probably going to get it wrong. And that's because at first it has no idea what it's looking at. It's pretty much guessing at random. But this is really exciting because once you know that it's wrong, and we do because we know that we started with an image of a dog, that wrong alert can be propagated back through the network. And then each of those little tiny decisions along the way that added up to the wrong answer will be given just a little bit less weight or importance the next time that it's run. So by showing it lots and lots of examples of photos of dogs, all kinds of dogs, and correcting it every time it gets it wrong, our neural network can get better and better at getting the right answer. So the pathways that lead to the right answer get stronger over time, and the other pathways get weaker. The neural network teaches itself what is actually a dog or not a dog. Mhm.
Yeah, and each of those little nodes in our network is acting kind of like the neurons in our brain. So let's take a closer look. And each node or neuron is gathering information from the previous nodes and then passing what it learned to the next nodes. In fact, new discoveries about how our brains process the things we see are helping researchers to improve the performance of artificial neural networks all the time. For example, what if in that photo of the dog were mostly covered up by a bush? Well, humans can probably still figure out that there's a dog back there, but how do we do that? Well, we know that there are all kinds of feedback loops, connections that go back and forth between the different brain areas that take whatever bits of information we have and use it to build up a better and better guess of what we're looking at. And by adding similar feedback loops to neural networks, scientists have improved computer vision programs by leaps and bounds. So computers really are learning to see better, but what is that actually good for? Well, for one thing, there are all sorts of smart camera applications, like this project that uses neural networks to distinguish between different kinds of birds and help scientists track their population. And smart cameras can also be used in sports to automatically track players and capture the action. And even robots can use real time computer vision to perform and search rescue missions in dangerous areas.
Those are all really neat applications. And there's also a lot of applications that involve scientists trying to look through huge data sets. So for example, in this project, they're using a neural network in order to classify galaxies across the universe. And there are also lots of applications in healthcare screenings, where right now neural networks are already starting to help human doctors diagnose and diseases earlier and more accurately. And of course, we've all been hearing about advances and setbacks in developing self-driving cars. There are a lot of issues here still, and the autonomous vehicles that are being tested today are still really far away from being able to grapple with unexpected scenarios, like when people jaywalk or when other vehicles behave unexpectedly, or even just a traffic cop redirecting drivers. There's still a really long way to go. And there are other computer vision problems that remain to be solved too.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some of the issues with artificial intelligence programs. Um, and another big problem we're seeing has to do with computer vision and the issue of bias. For example, when Joy Buolamwini was a graduate student studying artificial intelligence, she discovered that existing facial recognition programs did a really bad job of recognizing her face and the faces of other dark skinned women, unless she put on a white mask. Now, this discovery led her to create the Algorithmic Justice League, which highlights issues of bias in artificial intelligence. And in 2018, the American Civil Liberties Union released a study showing that Amazon's facial recognition software misidentified 28 current members of Congress as criminals in a mugshot database. And of the Congress people who were identified as criminals, a disproportionate number were people of color. But in addition to these really thorny safety and ethical issues, computer vision also faces challenges just in terms of how well it can recognize something as simple as a shirt. For example, maybe a computer can recognize a shirt if it looks like this or this, but what if it's on a hanger like this or crumpled on the floor like this? These kinds of artificial intelligence programs are only as good as the set of examples that they're trained on, and they're a long way from being able to deal with the messiness of the real world. Certainly not as well as our amazing brains can. So we still have a lot of work cut out for us when it comes to computer vision. But scientists, like those at the Center for Brains, Minds, and Machines, headquartered at MIT, are hard at work learning more about how humans process really complicated visual information, so we can apply that to computers to improve artificial intelligence. And if you're interested in learning more about artificial intelligence and computer vision from the folks who are studying it, you can head over to the YouTube channel Nano Nerds, where we have a whole bunch of videos to check out. All right, well, that's all for our presentation. Now I'm going to invite Meg to come back on so that we can take your questions. All right, welcome back, Meg. So let's see. I have a question. We mentioned some of the applications of neural networks during this presentation. Are there any other interesting applications out there aside from the ones that we mentioned?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this presentation, we really focused all about computer vision and image recognition, but that's not the only thing that neural networks are being used for. It's just one example of lots and lots of things. And they're starting to become, more and more common in lots of different tasks. So for example, every time that you type in a web search to try to find an answer to a question, that is the computer program behind the scenes is trying to search the entire internet to first of all figure out what it is that you're asking, and then to try to put the best answer to your question at the top of the page. And it's using neural networks in order to do that. Um, and there's other examples like speech recognition. If you have ever talked into your phone to transcribe something, or have asked Siri or Alexa something, then in order to understand what you said in the first place, your voice needs to sort of be understood and parsed. And that language understanding is also being powered by neural networks. Not to mention the smart assistant themselves, Alexa, Siri, the Google Home, like all of those are also powered by this deep learning, where um, they're trying to use all of the information that's out there about how language works and how to find the answers to questions. And in order to process all that information, deep learning is really, really helpful in that. I'm trying to think also, like optimizing your route to work using the Maps application, or translating between languages. If you've ever used an app for that, those benefit from neural networks as well. So all kinds of things, including image recognition. um, let's see. Yeah, so I have a question actually coming in here from Julie, and she wants to know a little bit more about this bias issue. And she writes, she doesn't understand, why are people of color not understood or detected by the computers, and is that because of the people who set up the programs in the first place?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and a really good idea of what the answer might be, because it very much does have to do with the people who are programming these facial recognition algorithms or software from the get-go. And so we explained a little in the presentation. Meg showed how specifically for neural networks, in order for them to recognize images, they need to be trained. And there needs to be a huge data set of images that can teach the computer what the thing it's trying to identify looks like. So in the example of the dog, right, it needed to see all different types of dogs. And so if the people who are setting up these databases of images for facial recognition software, if they're not including a diverse set of data of all different types of people, representing all the different types of skin colors and facial features that people can have, then the facial recognition software isn't going to be very good at recognizing all types of people, which is a huge problem. And so there are a lot of other problems with biases in artificial intelligence, but specifically for facial recognition software, I think the biggest one is these training data sets that they have, and that there is bias written into them from the beginning, because they're just not using a diverse and representative set of images to train these programs. And so people like Joy Buolamwini, she was one of the first people to really recognize this. And so she created the Algorithmic Justice League to try to not just recognize when there's biases in these types of programs, but to really put a stop to it and make sure that there's more fairness and justice in the way that we create these programs, so that they're not introducing biases, and also by introducing those biases, causing discrimination. Yeah. Okay, so Meg, now I have a question for you. So we talked about these different applications, and just going back to that a little bit, can we talk a little more about how neural networks can be used to recognize galaxies?
Oh yeah. Right. So one of the really helpful aspects for science and also for health, as I mentioned, is specifically like looking for images through images. Um, Either there's like maybe a ton of them, or they're very big, or you want to do it really quickly, and it becomes a sort of a matter of scale. Like it becomes very difficult for human researchers to actually like tackle that much looking through data. Um, and one of the examples is this program called Morpheus. It's written by a group at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and they wanted to make it easier for astronomers to classify galaxies in huge image data sets, because I don't know if you know this, but there's a new telescope that's being built right now in Chile. They just tested the camera, and it's the biggest camera ever built for the field of astronomy, and it's going to return just a mind-boggling amount of data every day. And so to help scientists with that, this group at Santa Cruz, they developed this computer program based on a neural network that has learned how to recognize different galaxy types all on its own. So as a first pass, they can ask the computer to look at an astronomical image and point out which types of galaxies are in which places. And then by tallying all of that up, the scientists hope to be able to learn more about why or when different types of galaxies form, and how they change over time. So it's a really fundamental, important question. And by using neural networks in order to help us look at the data, we'll actually be able to look at more of it faster. So that's really exciting. And then just bringing it like back down to earth, it's the same kind of thing that like healthcare practitioners are starting to use now, not necessarily to diagnose somebody with a condition independently of a doctor. And I think that's really important to say. They're really useful as like a double check, or as a first pass at this point, and then they can help people sort of understand where we need to go back and look at more, and get more information about a particular case, that sort of thing. But there are lots and lots of healthcare applications that are already helping people. So let's see. I want to go back to talking a little bit about the brain, if that's all right, Megan, because we have this understanding of how humans recognize images, but I'm just curious, how is it that we can understand that information? How do we know what's going on in the brain like that?
Yeah, there are all sorts of ways that scientists can figure out what's going on in our brains. And one of the ways they can do that is by imaging the brain using, you may have heard of something called an MRI, which is a scan that can show you inside the body. And it can show you different parts of the body. But scientists are now able to take that a step further with something called an fMRI, which is a functional MRI. I believe that's what the F is, right? It's functional MRI, yeah. And so if you take this type of MRI, an fMRI of the brain, it can not only show you different parts of the brain, but it can show you which parts of the brain are active when a certain thing is happening. So depending on how much blood flow and oxygen there is to different parts of the brain, they can kind of pick that up in this fMRI. And so it can show scientists which parts of the brain are activated at a certain time. So say if they're trying to figure out, which is something that scientists have done, is to try to figure out what parts of the brain are activated, for example, when you're recognizing a face. So they can show people pictures of faces or different types of objects, and then look at an fMRI of their brain while they're looking at those objects, and see what parts of the brain are being activated at those different times, which is really interesting and can really tell them like which parts of the brain are working at different times. I believe scientists can also do other types of tests on patients who have diseases like epilepsy, who are undergoing treatments for that disease. And they can actually gather data that way about how the brain works, to not just help treat those people, but to also just generally understand what's going on in our brains. So yeah, lots of cool ways that people are studying the brain. That's a really good question. So we have a little bit of time left, and we have another question here that I do not know the answer to, and I don't know if you do. If not, we can just leave it at we don't know. But so Julie is wondering, do people who have dyslexia have spots on their brain that aren't working?
Yeah, I don't know specifically about dyslexia either, but just to piggyback on your answer from before, though, there are absolutely things that we've learned about the brain based on when people have an abnormality or something has happened and they had an accident to and it damaged a particular part of their brain, and they sometimes can be connected with researchers that want to figure out what exactly is going on. And by understanding how that has impacted their abilities, then that gives us some insight into what those parts of the brain do. So there's a very famous case, and I forgot her patient, her name, but there was a very famous patient who specifically injured a part of her brain that, and this was a really terrible accident, and it was really unfortunate that it happened. But she injured part of her brain that was in that visual stream, and it meant that she couldn't. What happened was she couldn't recognize objects anymore. She couldn't. If you asked her to draw a picture of something she's very familiar with, like an apple, she couldn't do it. Like it didn't, she just, it's not like she didn't know what an apple was. She just could not draw it on the paper. But then other parts of the brain and other capabilities weren't impacted at all. So if you gave her an envelope, she could put the envelope in the slot at whatever orientation it needed to be, even though if you asked her to tell you if the slot was vertical or horizontal, she couldn't recognize that. So it's really kind of interesting how those types of situations have led us to understand things about the brain, and so grateful to those people for turning something unfortunate like that into a lot of gained knowledge for everyone. So I don't know about dyslexia. We will have to look that up, but absolutely that is one way that we have learned things about how the brain works.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely a lot of things that we know about dyslexia. And I would say that it's not that there's a spot on the brain that doesn't work, but what I do know about dyslexia, that it has to do with the way that your brain processes information, for sure. And it's more that your brain is just processing information a little differently than the way other people process information. And so now, because we can recognize dyslexia, there are a lot of ways to work with people who have dyslexia so that they are able to process information in the way that they need to, so that they can read or function just as well as anyone who does not have dyslexia. Which is great, and just shows how much we can kind of learn about the brain. So really good question, but it looks like we are just about out of time. Thank you so much for joining us and for your great questions. That was really fun. And thanks to Meg. I'm gonna give you a chance to say goodbye quickly before we go.
All right, thanks everybody, bye.
Well, thank you again for joining us. We have a whole lot more going on over at MOS Live. So check us out on social media or check out our website at mos.org/MOS at home to see what we're up to. And if you enjoyed this program, please consider supporting the museum by visiting engage.mos.org/welcome. Your support will help us continue to bring STEM programming to you live and at home and free of charge. All right, thank you again so much for joining us. We had a great time and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.